Welcome to the Food Junkies podcast. Here, we aim to bring you the experience, strength, and hope of professionals working on the front lines in the field of food addiction. Our mission is to educate you, the listener, and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a recognized disorder. Here, we discuss all things recovery, exploring the many pathways people take towards abstinence in order to achieve a health-forward lifestyle. We hope to inspire you to thrive rather than just survive. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, and share your journey with others. And hopefully the message will spread. Welcome, Food Junkies listeners. Today we are here with Saffi Biasetti, who's a licensed professional counselor, certified eating disorder specialist, and nationally recognized educator and speaker in the fields of eating disorder, body image, and embodiment. Anne is the author of the book Befriending Your Body and creator of the program based on the book, which is an evidence-based, informed, compassion approach that helps individuals repair their relationship with the body after years of disordered eating, chronic dieting, trauma, and shame. Her work integrates clinical expertise with lived experience, offering a grounded, non-pathologizing framework for healing. Today, we're focusing on her latest book, which is coming out, Your Body Never Meant You Any Harm, a somatic guide to forgiving and healing your relationship with your body. In this conversation, we explore how body forgiveness becomes a central mechanism for healing, shifting the focus from control and correction to listening, trust, and reconciliation with the body as an ally rather than an adversary. So, Anne, welcome.
Thank you, Clarissa. I love hearing you say all that. Like, oh, that sounded great. You put it together
I am
probably
so
better than I
amazing.
could. Thank you, Molly and Clarissa, for having me on again. I really appreciate that. Love being here with both of you.
Great. So, your work on body forgiveness has deeply influenced embodied healing conversations. Can you start by sharing how your own postpartum autoimmune illness kind of became the doorway for some of this work?
Yeah, sure. So, in my first book, Befriending Your Body, I share in the introduction that as a teenager, I went through an eating disorder and recovery. So by the time I was at that stage in my life, pregnant with my twin boys and then giving birth, I was very recovered by all standards. I was really taking very good care of my body. And so 4 months postpartum, I was in this maternal bliss, having these babies. And then 4 months postpartum, I became really unwell and didn't know what that unwellness was all about. I was starting to feel things and sense things in my body. I had, through the recovery period, I really learned to pay attention to my sensory cues. So I was doing that, but the thing I didn't know how to do was to fully stand up for my body yet. So what was happening was I was paying attention to these sensory cues. I was running to doctors left and right saying, and I was a clinician at the time, so I was saying things like, this doesn't feel like anxiety from my mind. This feels like it's happening from my body, like my heart is feeling this way, and my breathing is feeling this way, and my joints are feeling this way. And I kept getting dismissed. And unfortunately, and I write about this in the book, that women's bodies tend to get dismissed a great deal more out in the world. And of course, women of color, their bodies get dismissed even more out in the medical world. And I was one of those bodies. I had gained my appropriate weight for twin pregnancy, and I went in to see my male gynecologist and OB, and he said, well, how fabulous, you lost all your baby weight. Now, 4 months postpartum to lose baby weight should be a red flag, not being sent away saying you look great when I had said things like, but I couldn't walk up the stairs anymore. Like I was 30 years old and had to sit down on the stairs midway up. So, what happened after a whole year of going through that and really, really feeling very unwell, I kept saying, wow, something is almost the words I would use is something is kind of eating away at me inside, is what I felt. And for a moment there, I started, my mind would spin like, what is happening? And it was actually on my boys' first birthday, their first birthday party. And I had a huge amount of people, family and friends, and I kept saying, this is more of a party for me. I survived the first year with twins. And I went to bed that night. And actually, during the party, I had a couple of friends come over and say, like, are you okay? Are you all right? Something doesn't seem okay. You look really weak and tired. And I was like, yeah, I guess it's the babies because that's what I was told too. This is just stress. And you have twins. What do you expect? You're not resting. So, my mind was getting really confused, even though I was feeling all these signals and correctly identifying them, what we call interoception. I had very corrective interoceptive awareness, but I was being told otherwise. And like I said, at that point, I didn't know how to be a body advocate yet for myself. So I went to bed that night and this had been typically happening for me. My heart was racing so fast. And again, I was anxious about nothing, but my heart was jumping out of my skin and I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. That was probably the most disturbing quality every time I would try and rest. And something at that point, and this is long before the years of self-compassion work, teaching, practice, but something at that point brought my hands to my heart. And I just held my hands to my heart. And at that point, I think I was just using the pressure as a way to be like, oh, I need to like put my heart back in my chest. And I was pressing my hands to my heart. And it was in that moment that something was shifting in my body, like I felt this softening. And what was really happening is something was shifting that was blocking me from really listening. And that was judging my own body. I was listening to what everyone else was saying, oh, nothing's wrong, nothing's wrong. And I started judging my own body, like, nothing's wrong. This is all in my head. Like, oh, this is ridiculous. Why do I feel this way? And I was realizing afterwards that I was actually in a lot of self-critical thought, both toward myself and my body. And it was in that moment that that softened, and I was able to really be with the sensation. And tears started coming, and I was stayed with the sensation. And the more I stayed with it, the more it softened. My heart rate went down a little bit, but not a lot. And I just tuned in, like, does my what does my heart want me to know in this moment? And I just had these words come to me that from like my inner body that said something is really wrong. Something is really wrong. I actually got up in that moment. I remember my husband was still downstairs, and I got up and I went downstairs and I said, I'm something is seriously wrong, and I'm going tomorrow, and I'm not going to take no for an answer. And I want a whole repeat of blood tests and everything else. So that's what I did the following day. And that body advocacy was really my first step into embodiment. And sure enough, I found out immediately I was in what they call thyroid storm, which I have Graves' disease, and my body was so at a very dangerous point, actually, that the endocrinologist at the time said if you didn't have these two babies at home, I would be hospitalizing you. So I had to move into all that radical treatment very quickly. But the point being that that was my stopping point, meaning that there was that moment of me connecting, quieting the critical, quieting the thought pattern, and coming into just my sensory awareness was the immediate teaching for me of this body advocacy that says, oh my gosh, I promise I will never stop listening. And to me, that was something very different because I knew how to take care of my body, right? In the recovery, I was feeding it properly. And this is the other piece that was interesting that happened with this just on that recovery end too, that made that made me realize that something different was happening on an embodiment and a relationship end with my body. Not only did I turn toward listening it, but when the whole world was telling me, right, all the external noise was telling me, oh, you look fantastic. You're losing weight. And that was me standing there saying, I don't want to be doing that, losing weight. I was feeding myself like crazy, but my resting heart rate was 120. So my poor body had no choice but to, quickly get rid of everything. My stomach was extremely ill, everything. So there were two things happening. Both there was this deep, compassionate desire to say, no, I need to protect, I need to figure out what is happening. So there was this fierce compassion that showed up. Again, we didn't have those words then, but it came in the form of body protection that said, I must protect myself and figure out what's going on. And then came in the way of quieting that critical so that I could listen to the real sensory experience. And from there is when I said, okay, now what? Now what do I do to heal? And that was this next layer, what I talk about so much just in recovery work. I talk about that this was the layer, the embodiment layer was the layer that I had never known or was introduced to. And what I believe in the field of recovery work that we don't introduce clients to at all, if, any or at all, I should say. Mm.
Yeah, to hear you share your story in that way, that level that you had to get to, it's so crazy as you were sharing. Like my brain is going off. I'm like, oh my God, this is like so spiritual. Like the level that you had to get to connect to yourself in that way, it had to be this like spiritual experience. And to describe that powerful distinction between like that mind saying like there's something wrong, or to even like go to your doctor and describe like this isn't like the anxious mind, this is like this bodily thing, right? And so the mind is okay but the body is not. Or even to have that flipped experience, right, when the mind is not okay but to know that you're okay in your body, and to know that being able to discern those things is so important when it comes to this concept of embodiment. Can you talk more about that?
Yes, sure, Molly. And thank you for bringing in that spiritual component because that is what embodiment is at the end of the day. It is a psychospiritual construct. It is an ability to be in touch with not just, oh, what's happening in my body, but to understand that the body is a relationship, like any other love relationship that we're developing. Our body is our subjective experience, it's our relationship. And yes, this component of discernment between, there are days where our mind may be preoccupied with something, but about our body. But until we check in to our sensory experience, we really have no idea what our body has to say about that. Living with these autoimmune illnesses, I had another one diagnosed recently, and living with these autoimmune illnesses, every day I'm checking in because my mind some days wants to wake up and be like, I know I'm going to have back pain again because I had it yesterday, or I know my joints are going to be achy because yes, last week I was in a flare or whatever. And then until I check in with my body, I have no idea. So my body may have a very different conversation. My mind may want to be preoccupied on the negative and the critical, but my body actually may feel pretty free that day. And, what I start off saying in the introduction of this book during that particular time period, this is what I recognized when I started going, because I brought myself to the place that for many years, I was finding relief in my body, which was on my yoga mat. And that's how, at that time in my life, I really got through all the radical treatment of losing the thyroid gland and the radiation and all of that. I got through that by turning to the one place I knew that brought me ease in my body, which was yoga. And I was going frequently, like 3 to 4 times a week. And that is when I recognized that it was on the mat that actually my mind kind of quieted. And I'd be lying there. And again, as a psychotherapist at the time, I would be lying there and saying, like, isn't this so interesting that this somatic practice quieted my mind, even though I still have this illness? Like, I left from there, my heart was, still at 120, maybe a little bit lower, but not much. I was still playing with medications, trying to get the dose right and all that, and I still didn't feel well, but my mind had softened. And the beauty of that is what I just mentioned before, that when the mind softens, that's when you can be in unity with your body. That's when the messages come alive. And that is when that loving spiritual connection can come alive. And I don't like to use the word love because everyone knows in my work, I'm like, no, self-compassion over self-love. I don't mean it in love in the way of you have to like anything that's going on, right? Or have to like what's you're experiencing in your body or how you view your body. That's not how I mean that word. What I mean is more in the spiritual realm, that there's an expansiveness that opens, that we can be, as the beautiful words of the philosopher Merleau-Ponty, who gave us the psycho-spiritual definition of embodiment. He says we can be beside our body. And I just love that word, and in this book, I have, practices and reflections that talk about how could you just be beside your body and take a listen, before we're ready to completely join, maybe.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like so beautiful and so poetic, but it also, I think, for so many people I work with, feels so inaccessible at times. Like, how do I start to practice to soften the mind so I can start to actually hear body? Like, what might be some entryways in for people?
Yeah, it's a great question. In this particular independent research study that I did on body forgiveness, I had a lot of women show up who said, it was funny in the interviews, they would begin by saying, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be here. And I said, well, tell me what you mean by that. And they would say, well, I don't really feel like I have an embodied connection with my body yet, but I am trying to work on this path of forgiveness. And I said, you're exactly the person I need here. I said, because that's exactly who's going to pick up this book, right? I said, maybe there'll be a couple of people who feel very, close with their body and in this beautiful relationship of listening. But for the most part, it's going to be folks who say, What are you talking about? And I can't stand this body and I don't want to be near it. So, the path of body forgiveness, which is complete, I'm just going to start there for a moment, which is completely different than forgiveness in the way we think about it. So, in the research, body forgiveness is really defined as a forgiveness that comes from the mind-heart experience. And what that means is that when we're in a moment of forgiving the body and forgiving ourselves, it'll be a felt sense release. Like there will be a shift, an internal shift that happens. And that's quite different than when we're trying to forgive, believing that something has wronged us. And we're trying to forgive from the mind. And then there's a lot of gripping and grasping and striving to try and forgive. And forgiving, body forgiveness has this softening around it. So when people entered and were talking about what they needed to let go of the striving to forgive, they realized that the number one thing that had to come first, and this is part one of the book, is called understanding. And so chapters 1 through 4 create this opening to understanding, and that begins with understanding that you've done nothing wrong. You did not create this separation. This separation has gone on long in the world before you ever existed, hundreds and hundreds of years. And so we have to begin with the understanding of how did it go awry? And it had nothing to do with our doing or not doing something. It had to do with growing up in a world generation after generation. This is an intergenerational pass down here. This is deep, goes way back. And it wasn't their fault either, you know. So it goes way back to where disembodiment began, and we start there. We start with understanding how we never meant it to be this way. This is not how bodies come into the world. This is not the nature of our body. If we just look at and contemplate again on that psychospiritual and on how our bodies work, our bodies are constantly in search of homeostasis. They are constantly trying to be in balance, right? Working interconnected constantly, one organ to the next. Nothing is separate, every one organ helping the other. So our bodies by nature are compassionate and trying to heal, trying to help, trying to calm, doing all in its power to actually make our ability to live easier. Now, that doesn't mean that that happens all the time. Things go awry. Things happen. So, but it doesn't mean that our body is not trying to fight for that and for us that way all the time. So we have to start with that understanding.
And then once we have that understanding, is that what kind of helps people shift into, because you write that the body never meant us harm, right? But if I'm somebody who maybe is in a larger body, or maybe I've been struggling with disordered eating my whole life, or maybe I have, an autoimmune condition, how do I begin to like work with that belief that like, this body, although you say this understanding piece, right? Which can still, I think, feel like again, they say the biggest journey is from the head to the heart.
Absolutely.
So how do what are some of the steps that maybe can be helpful to get there?
Yeah, exactly. So I like to say from the very start, can we at least be curious?
Hmm.
Right. So curiosity is everything, because curiosity at least does something which I actually even have a practice it in the book that's called, can we just give our body a chance? So being curious means that we're going to say, all right, I still don't believe any of this, and I'm still feeling at war with my body, but can I open up the possibility that there may be something new I can learn about this journey, right? About this journey back. So, curiosity and giving our body a chance means that we'll start to get investigative of our own, not just what's out there in the world, but then turning toward our own journey of when do we really believe that this disembodied separation, or what Dr. Neva Piran calls the othering, when do we believe this separation from our own body began? Now, some people can have a very distinct memory of that, and others are like, I think I was born with it. And that's fair. That's fair because sometimes we have no memory at all of a distinct time when, we felt like our body was a problem out in the world. And other times we really do. So it takes this journey of self-understanding as well as understanding what has collided in the world. You know, this world has collided with our self-understanding as well. And then we have to put some effort into paying attention to the mind state, right? The critical mind that gets in the way of us giving our body a chance. So I liken in this book, because embodiment is developing a relationship with your body, I liken it to any other love relationship. You know, in many ways, at one point, my editor from the publishing company, Shambhala, said, well, maybe we should call this like the, couples relationship book for her body, for body healing, because I liken it to any other relationship, meaning that you will never deepen a relationship if you don't give that person a chance, right, to get to know them. So then to do that, we have to calm the critical thoughts. So there's many ways to do it, but one of the ways that we begin with that from the beginning is to actually start to somatically bring in some regulation to our body. And I have tons of practices in the book around that, but we bring in simple one that I start with from early on is, how do we know when we're in our center and when we're off our center? And what I mean by that is, when we are off our center, we are going to be in internal states of feeling really unsafe in our body. And that's when critical thoughts are going to be at an all-time high. So to give our body a chance and to get curious, we actually have to just find our middle. And, I have even simple little practices, in the book where I have people sitting and really just imagining that there's a little string coming from the navel up to the chest, the heart, and then up to the throat. Like just spending a moment concentrating on that midline and to see what it's like to come from that place, see if we can give a chance to the critical mind to quiet and come into a new understanding. So anytime we're off our center, we're not going to be open and have this ability or accessibility to finding a new way. So that understanding combined with beginning to figure out, well, how often am I off my center? What brings me back? And like I said, there's lots of practices that help people to find that way back, but that is critical in this part one of understanding.
That's so good. We talk a lot in our community about curiosity, right? And like, because curiosity is expansive, where judgmental, being judgmental is very like rigid, and it just really shuts us down and really backs us into a corner. And then we have no options other than to respond very, like in a very self-protective way, which, as we've heard, right, like often gets us safety, but not necessarily safety in a way that is advantageous for us in the long run, maybe just right in the acute phase of danger. And it's really interesting as you're talking about this and like developing curiosity, and how can we even like find that center so we can find that curiosity. And it's interesting. So my oldest daughter, she calls it her triple A syndrome. So she was recently diagnosed with autism, ADHD combined at a type, and generalized anxiety. And we were having this, she's 13, right? So she's this teenage girl, like, the whole thing, middle school, like, just like, if she could get like whammied, she's getting it all, right? And the other day we're having this conversation because she's talking about her girlfriends and they're all talking about bodies. And she's like, it's very literal for her, right? Like the autism piece, it's like very literal. And I was like, well, how do you navigate this or whatever? And she's like, I just don't believe anything that my thoughts say about me after 3 p.m. And I was like,
Love
that is
it.
so smart. Like
That's
she knows she just like hits her wall like at three
I
o'clock. She's just like,
love
my
it.
medication poops out. Like I'm exhausted from the day. Like I just don't believe anything my brain has to say about me after
Oh
3
my
p.m.
God.
every day. I'm like, you don't even have to develop curiosity when you just have like that kind of rule, right?
Exactly. That is great. That is so brilliant, actually. And that's exactly what invite people into discovering like throughout the day. Like there's reflections too that talk about how do you start your day? What's the middle of the day? What's the end of the day? What kind of energy do you have? Like we have to get to know this body. So that's your daughter brilliantly knowing and also accepting her inner experience, right? Which is that, hey, at 3 o'clock, no way, I won't even trust what these thoughts are doing. And that is so imperative. And that's a beautiful embodied language right there. And
Yeah.
standing. And that's what I mean is that so we have to get to know the inner body experience first, like that, for us to be able to quiet that mind there's one point in the book where once people develop that inner understanding, which is part one, then part two, which is all about embodying self-compassion and why that helps. There's practices in that part that then actually just use the words, not now. I'm giving my body a chance, when those critical thoughts come in. So we have to learn a lot first, but then we can use that kind of language, that says, "Hey, can I just have this moment?" And I do a lot of somatic parts work as well. So a lot of what I use the language around is, can I just allow that critical part of me to just give me some permission for this moment, just this very moment, to listen in, because I may learn something new that could help both of us, right? So we have to develop that understanding of, what is my rhythm throughout the day? What is my energy level throughout the day? And how does that impact my thoughts? There's a reason that I teach this, of course, all the time in my women's embodiment retreats, that there is a reason why the predatory diet culture and the ad marketing and advertising agencies, they know for certain that there are times of the day, especially for women, that they feel worst about themselves and their body image, and those are their targeting times. So, maybe at, 8 a.m. when you wake up after having a poor night's sleep, especially, you're in perimenopause or menopause, and, you have bags under your eyes, and, the wrinkles are deeper. Maybe that's not the time to trust your mind's evaluation. Maybe that's the time to stay in bed a little bit longer, even if it's just a minute, and give your body a chance to awaken with a different thought perspective about it. Like, hey, out of fairness, I'm going to be really tired today. Maybe I'm not even going to bother taking a longer look in the mirror because I know those thoughts are going to come up. So we have to know, without the sensory experience, that's what your daughter was talking about, right? She is really aware of her sensory experience, but without that, we don't really have a leg to stand on. These thoughts have been programmed. They come from the outside. We've absorbed them, and then they become a self-construct, and they become an ongoing internal critical rhetoric that we feel we have no control over. But the truth is, when we find our center, which comes from the sensory awareness, we absolutely do have the ability to have an impact around where our thoughts go and in what way. And so that's where mindfulness comes in as a critical helper and is part of, as we know, self-compassion work, right? It's a, second construct of the three, right? Understanding the common humanity, mindfulness has to be a part of it. And then that self-kindness, of course. So that self-kindness is the part that says, can I just give my body a chance?
Yeah, definitely. So can you help us like kind of decipher the difference then, or how body forgiveness is then different from acceptance, body acceptance and body neutrality? Because something we talk about, or I've definitely talked about with my clients before, is like just this idea of body neutrality. Like, you don't have to like it. Can we just not hate on it? Can we just like somewhere like it's a body, it does the things that we needed to do, maybe sometimes, well, whatever. Like, how do we figure out the difference? And then, yeah, how do we get more into that practice?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I also practice from body neutrality lens. That's what the whole Befriending Your Body program practice, is grounded in. Um, Body forgiveness is what moves us toward embodiment. And so it's different than just body neutrality, which is really about the surface body, right? Or about our relationship with body image. So when it comes to our internal body, body forgiveness is again, like I said, moving away from the mind's idea of forgiveness and really wanting to move into getting to know our bodies so that the outcome of body forgiveness is, wow, I may have done some things that were unkind to my own body. Um, and my body, also took the brunt, meaning that, gosh, my body didn't want any of this either. So when we think of something like body image and we're in a body that is absolutely not recognized out in the world or valued in any way, even worse, more than ever now, I believe. Um, we are in this place of saying, like really upset, of course, understandably so, that we are in this body. But in chapter 5, which is all when self-compassion comes in, and then chapter 6 is when we take that deep dive into forgiveness, and especially chapter 7, I say, have you ever stopped to wonder that your body never liked any of this either? Oh, like this has been so hard on your body too. And people may be like, well, but in what way? My organs don't know what my body size is or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is when we feel like we don't belong, when we're hating on our own body, and when we feel like we don't belong, like we're an other, right, out in the world, our body is in constant state of attack and feels internally in our autonomic functioning that we are in constant state of defense and attack. So it is hard on our body too. And that's why I say, hey, your body never asked for this either. And let's level the playing field a bit here through the work of self-compassion that says, and then comes to understand. So the end result of body forgiveness is the title of the book. Is people coming to say, I don't think my body ever meant to harm me. I think now what I understand is that there was something else that was always at play here, and that my body never meant to harm me. We didn't mean to do this together. So where acceptance comes in is not on the level of the surface body, because nowhere do I say, and especially in this book, that we're going to be liking the fact that our body is not accepted out in this world. Nowhere am I saying that acceptance of image or acceptance of bodily change that is really hard, right? Aging and sickness, and, like how many women came into the study that had gone through cancer and had lost their breasts, and saying like, hey, I still really have a hard time accepting the physicality and the change. So acceptance means something very different on this body forgiveness journey. And what it means is that we are accepting in the end here, when we really feel that shift of that body forgiveness and we believe the title of the book, right? When we believe it, we have moved into an experience that I call the we experience, which says we are in this together. So I accept that this has been what it's been. I accept, what it is now, not just on a surface level, but internally too. Because remember that what this embodiment journey is really about is about the impact of body image, not body image. So throughout the entire book, body image is covered from chapter 1 to chapter 10, but it's always going to be covered on the internal experience of body image and body image distress rather than the external. So when we get to crossing over into that we experience, like I said, it's like any other love relationship that we are highly committed to, which is, I may not like that, all the time, but I am accepting that we're going to work this through and that I'm going to constantly be in presence with you, meaning I'm not just going to look through my eyes at your changes, but I'm going to sense and feel them. And I'm going to respond to them. And I'm going to understand that some of these I can impact and change, and some of these I cannot. And that is what acceptance means on the embodiment journey, different than a body image journey. I hope that clarifies a bit.
Yeah, it really helps. Like thinking of like my own personal story and like, is there a part of the we where there's a part of, I that did this also harm to body that is necessary to take place? I think I've come to the place where, like, yeah, I can see that body didn't do this to me. I know, again, the understanding of where these messages came, and then, but it's like the mind did it to the body, kind of in a way. And so now, in trying to meld or marriage the two together, it feels like that's a piece that's also kind of necessary.
It's 100% necessary. And that is the piece. And that's why self-compassion is so imperative to develop, because once we do that, what we're going to find is good old chapter 6, which is all about grief and regret and shame. So because when we move into attempting to move toward this depth of forgiveness, we have to first be able to hold those really, really tough emotions. And self-compassion is the only thing that starts to soften that. And what you're saying, Clarissa, is right there is a moment of regret where we may say, and what I mentioned, regret came in three forms in the research. And one form of regret was the unknown and unintentional regret, which are things like, you know, things we all did. Like, I don't know, I was a kid of I was a teenager of the 80s. So, we did aerobics like crazy. We jumped all over the place. And, how many times we probably injured our spine like you would not believe from doing all that jumping. And that was unknown, unintentional. It was fun. It was enjoyable. It was an embodied experience that later led to some degenerative harm, we have to make peace with that, right? We were having fun, we were embodied. And then people come to, again, like eating disorders or anything else that was self-harming and say, like, how about the known ones? Like, I know I harm my body this way. You know, how many times I even said, I don't know, maybe those years of starvation and restriction affected my autoimmune development. What do I know, right? So there are these known things that we've done. And then people say, well, if I knew I did it, then it was intentional, right? No, nobody is born wanting to harm themselves. These behaviors came around from complete dysregulation, and we knew no other way. So those are known regrets that we have to grieve, but they were unintentional. And then the last section of the regret is what I call the muddy water regrets, because there are things that have happened and that happen now that we say, maybe it caused it, but maybe not. Because there are only very few things that we know medically that have an absolute causation, right? Instead, what we say is, I don't know, maybe, the way I lived the last 20 years brought this on, but maybe not. We can't answer those regrets. And the bottom line is, when it comes to any one of those regrets, forms of regret, it requires grieving. There's lots of grief, and grief must be there and must be held compassionately for us to move into the depth of forgiveness.
Even the way that you talk about it, and like even just there, it already made me feel soften, like
Mm.
around like what happened, or, and I think that that is so hopeful for people in reading this type of material. I am curious just to touch on, in recovery work, what happens when we push the body to comply, right? Maybe eat a certain amount of food or not eat a certain amount of food, before body safety and trust, or maybe even embodiment is understood.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I have, many dear clients, going through this in their recovery process now. And well, what happens, as we know, is that it can be felt and received as quite traumatic at times, right? Meaning that there's not a lot of buy-in from the mind. So there's going to be a lot of reactivity a lot of times from the body. So what I like to offer is to really understand once again, what is the intention for our body, meaning that there are times that for body safety. So when it comes to our bodies absolutely needing the care, right, needing the safety, that our body's going to be really confused at times. So if we have spent a really long time not caring for it, right? Meaning that, and not intentionally, again, like we're saying, because the adaptation, how many times we hear people say, I don't know how to live, if we're just going to speak about eating disorders for a moment, I don't know how to live without my behavior. Their behavior saved them in many ways, and the way that people express it and feel like this has been my coping. I don't know how to live without it. So their body has been also going along for the ride. Like, yeah, okay. So now when we try and start bringing in regularity back to what our body once knew, because remember, everyone's body was born being nurtured through food consistently with regularity. So there's something really, really deep in there that our body remembers is natural to receiving food again in this natural way, but it hasn't had it in so long, it's scared. So our body's going to continue to react in certain ways, both physiologically and also autonomically, that may feel terrifying during that time. But what I like everyone to understand is let's stay with it here, because your body's just confused, not knowing if this is going to stay. So we may touch upon this natural, oh, something feels right about this, but at the same time, I'm terrified because is it going to stay? Are you going to stay with me? Are you going to continue to care for me? Is really what our internal body is saying. Do I trust that you're going to stay with me? And continue to care. So we do have to consider it that way. As I said, I have many clients that are in this process now, and this is the language that I try and have them say is, listen, let's just be with your body for this moment, just this moment, and then let's see if you can get through the next moment. Your body's just looking to see if you're going to stay. And let's see what's going to happen. So I don't know if that quite answered it, but that's an important aspect of knowing, reinterpreting the signals, that the body is sending, as rather than just about scared about food. No, it's actually scared about, are we going to stay with this care? Are we going to be consistent? Are we going to abandon the body again? That's really a part of the messaging as well.
And even following along those lines, for the clinicians or the recovery professionals, maybe who are even listening to this conversation today or who are interested in, your work or your book, what are the risks of overlooking the body's lived experience once these behaviors maybe even appear resolved, right? So like talking about fears and like having to like have patience for the client or ourselves individually, right? Like, are we going to stay? Are we going to continue with this care? But then we've continued with this care and maybe things appear resolved, but maybe we're overlooking some things. Like, what risks do we run?
Yeah, well, we run the risk. I have worked through this model of embodied recovery for so many years with my clients and in what I teach as well. And what I say is, I actually do, I stand firm in that I don't believe there is such a thing as one eating disorder morphing into the next and things like that. What I say is, no, they just haven't embodied. So embodiment really is the container of recovery. It's the container, my first research study, embodiment encased. It was, we use visual images and qualitative research, and embodiment was a beautiful container from the ground all the way around the recovery process. And it's a really nice way to envision it that way, that, we can get to behavioral recovery, but we're not going to have the holding. We won't have the holding there unless we have developed both a relationship with the body and with food. Food is a relationship as well. So this is crucial. And that is how, unfortunately, if we don't have embodiment there, which is the absolute willingness and wish to protect our body and to be as vigilant and protective and caring of it as we would a child. If we are not at that point with it or don't get to that point and get to the point of all this grief that has to take place, then unfortunately we're stuck in still the behavioral care, and that is going to get impacted again. We're not going to have the same grounding and protection that we do when we get to embodiment. That protection that I mentioned when I went through that illness and my weight was coming down, that said that my brain registered as, no, this is danger. This is unsafe. I don't want this. I don't care how many people are telling me I look good. This baby weight is not supposed to come off like this. This is unnatural. So that's the language of embodied protection that won't ever let us go there again.
So, what do you hope that readers most deeply feel when they read your book, Your Body Never Meant You Any Harm?
My wish is that immediately, very quickly, from just the introduction on, that they gain that this was never their fault. That feeling separated, feeling at war with their body, feeling left out, feeling non-belonging is not their fault. It's not their body's fault either. It's never a body's nature. So I want all readers to know that from the start, that this was never the natural place for your body, and it was never your intention either. And that there are many things that have come in the way to disrupt our grounding, our center, and our relationship with our body. And that's what I hope the book can offer them, in understanding and coming back home, is what I call it.
That's beautiful. All right. So we have a signature question, but since you've been a guest on Food Junkies before, we've changed it up for you, Anne. So if you could offer one reframe to someone who believes their body has failed them, what would you invite them to consider?
Yes. Okay. So, well, first of all, I'm a big person for words. Anyone who works with me knows that words are everything to me, because they land internally inside of our body in a big way. So first off, obviously, lots of empathy and compassion for that feeling of having to live with that, really feeling like your body has failed you. But then I would do what I ask all my clients to do. So if I hear a client use that word, I'll, after the compassion, may put a hand to my own heart and say, wow. So I wonder if we can take a look at some other words that fail may mean. And what I ask people to do is just close your eyes and just take a moment and let me list off a bunch of other words that may be underneath the word fail, and see if any of them resonate. Things like disappointed, things like became unwell, things like let me down, things like deteriorated in some way, things, something changed, I got sick, right? Things like there was a decline or something shifted or broke down, so when we use the word fail, we keep it as an adversarial relationship. You did this to me. And we don't get into the inner experience. So when I say words like that, all of a sudden we're like, oh, okay, there is something underneath that word. There's something that's deeper than that word. And then we have a conversation about the body and about the inner body. When we feel like our body failed us and we leave it at there, we only have a mind's view of our body, and we keep the body in the othering again. We keep it as, unfortunately, the disembodied experience rather than the embodied experience, which those words, those deeper words, if you look up the synonym of fail or failure, these are all the words that are underneath it. So when we can get underneath it, and then that's when we have a conversation with our body.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Anne, for being here and for sharing your wisdom. And I'm hoping maybe one day there's going to be a body forgiveness program.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Maybe just an embodiment program. We'll see. It's things are bubbling. I let my own body guide me,
Awesome. Well, thank you.
and my community. So when the book comes out, I'll follow the lead,
Yeah, well, we'll help create some demand for it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being
You're
here.
so welcome. You're so welcome. Thank you both.
Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life Support Group. I'm Sweet Enough. Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals who offer one-to-one counseling and group coaching through Sweet Sobriety. Please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in today's episode, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps grow our show and allows us to reach others who need to hear this message of recovery. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies. And as Vera always says, the power is ours.